Welcome to Conversations with IU Northwest Community Partners. I'm going to welcome Chief Greg Mance to our conversation today. Welcome, Chief.
Thank you. It's a privilege to be speaking with you today.
Thank you so much. We understand that you are incredibly busy in this moment. These are, in fact, unprecedented times. And I just want to give our listeners a little bit of background. Following the death of Mr. George Floyd in police custody last week, the voice of protesters can be heard in all our communities in the United States and even in other countries. Mr. Floyd, an African-American man in his 40s, was identified by the Minneapolis Police Department as a suspect in a case that involved the forging of a $20 bill. We don't know much about how actually the situation evolved, but we all know that Mr. Floyd died. Today, we want to hear from those working in the policing field, and we really don't have a better person than Chief Mance to talk to. So let me ask you first, Chief Mance, to tell us about yourself a little bit and what led you to pursue a career in policing?
Sure. Well, I'm about as region as you come. I born and raised in Maryville and Crown Point. Went to Indiana University Northwest. I, from a very early age, felt I had a calling to law enforcement. I went to a Catholic grade school, and they always talked about finding your calling in life. And I always felt that law enforcement was my calling. There was never a question. As soon as I was probably in 5th or 6th grade, I knew that this is what I was going to do. And as a result of that, I just immersed myself in everything I could to prepare for it. So I became a police explorer with the Maryville Police Department when I was, I think, 14 years old. And the Police Explorer programs, for the listeners that aren't aware of it, is it's a Boy Scout program that puts young boys and girls into career fields that they have an interest in. So there's exploring for nursing, there's exploring for law enforcement, and a few others. So I was lucky enough to find my way into that program with the Maryville Police and had some great mentors there. And through that, things just kind of continued to build on themselves naturally. I love the region. Again, many generations of my family have been here, worked in the mills. So again, feel like I really have a connection to the area. I didn't have any desire to leave. And as I was in, my formative years of junior high and high school, I was always very into the news, and I'd read the newspaper, and I would see the wealth of knowledge that was coming out of Indiana University Northwest. If there was a local or national issue, I was seeing in the newspaper that our professors and our university was responding to those needs and being a part of the solution. And I thought, if I want to work and live in the region for the rest of my life, there's no better place for me to further my education than IUN. So as soon as I graduated high school, again, the way things kind of build upon themselves, I went from being a police explorer to getting hired by the Maryville Police Department as a clerk. I worked at their substation, which at the time was located on the border of Gary and Maryville, 54th and Broadway. So I worked midnights there and went to school at IUN during the daytime, and ended up doing an internship with, at the time was a training council, which eventually turned into the Regional Police Academy. So, it's one of those things where I've been very fortunate in life. I've worked hard to get where I'm at, but I've always been there and open to new opportunities. And through all that, I completed my degree at IUN. Didn't really know anything about Griffith. I had driven through it a few times in my life prior to applying here, but I didn't have any connection here. And I had 3 or 4 people telling me, that Griffith was going to have a job opening, and that you should apply just to get experience, because my intention was to go work for the Maryville Police Department. I had a lot of connections there. It's where I grew up. It's where I wanted to work. But fortunately enough for me, I scored the top of the 110 applicants, and they offered me a job. And I thought that, it'd be better for me to go somewhere where I didn't have those connections, where perhaps there would be no chance of someone feeling that I owed them something for my job. I like the independence of having earned this completely on my own and not having to worry about there being rumor of me getting the job because I knew someone. So I came here, worked patrol for about 4 years, and in my third year, became a corporal. Started going back to college to get my master's degree. And after my fourth year, I went into investigations, continued my master's degree. And because I was working so much, I was working the road, working investigations, and working side jobs just to make ends meet. My master's degree probably took me about 5 years. But eventually, I did get it and continued to work here in Griffith. And about 7 years ago, a little over 7 years, I was named the police chief, and I've been in that capacity here ever since. And I'm very pleased to say that throughout all that, I've kept my connection with Indiana University Northwest. Many of the professors that I, studied under, that were my mentors now, I get to see on a regular basis through the capacity that I serve on with SPIA, which is the advisory board. So again, like I said, I'm about as region as you get, and I'm very, very pleased to be affiliated with IUN and the great people that educate our people.
And you set a great example for our students. And so I'm so glad that you provided a description of your background, and there is so much experience there, and it's so valuable. So I have a question about the current scenario. And so what do you think about the situation right now in reference to the police community relations in general?
Well, they've taken a giant step backwards. So much ground, had been, so much effort had been made in recent years to improve that. We continue to train our officers to make them more professional, to become better servants, public servants, and to make sure that we understand the places where people come from, the feelings they have, and how we can build relationships. And I think in Griffith, we've done a lot to make that happen. Again, through partnership with Indiana University Northwest and others, we've brought training to not only my department, but other regional departments, most recently Highland and Munster, through Professor Zarletta. We brought implicit bias training to all these departments, brought in a subject matter expert from Washington, D.C., and had some very honest and good discussion in that training. And, it's steps like that I think in some ways we've come very, very far. But the fact that we continue to have incidences like that of Mr. Floyd, where, there's no excuse for that, we all suffer a black eye. And I acknowledge that. It's unfortunate that every department has to suffer in some ways with that, but I get it. I understand it. We represent, the larger issue, and we always, no matter how good your department is and no matter how much you train your officers, there's always ways that we can get better and that we can become more understanding of one another. And I think that's probably a lesson that the entire society needs to learn as well.
This leads us to the next question that is more specific about Mr. Floyd's case. What is your broader understanding of the case?
Well, my understanding is based upon the same facts and video that everyone else has knowledge of. I don't have any insight into that case other than what's been publicly made. And, there's no way to justify what took place to Mr. Floyd. It is not something that any department trains to do. The way they handle that, the way the officer applied that force, it's the exact opposite of what we train. In police departments such as Griffith, we train 3 times a year in physical tactics, and a large part of that training is to eliminate the chance of serious injury, bodily harm, and death. And the actions that I saw in that video demonstrate that there was either a failure in training or a failure with that individual officer to follow the training. And there was also an apparent failure in the other officers that were on scene to recognize that and take action to prevent Mr. Floyd's death.
This is actually quite comforting, and I know that most people watching this interview will find it very comforting. Do you think there is a problem with the U.S. police culture in general, or do you actually believe that the cases like Mr. Floyd's case are isolated incidents?
You know, it's a phenomenon that I think mirrors people's belief in crime. You know, statistics show that crime, violent crime, property crime is at an all-time low. But if you ask most people, like I poll our citizens every once in a while, and many of them feel that the community of Griffith is in danger. It's never been more unsafe. But the statistics show the exact opposite. You know, people tell me all the time, I grew up in Griffith in the 80s or the late 70s, and we used to leave our house open. And my response to them usually is, well, I can see that because the rate of theft here in Griffith in the 70s and 80s was sky high compared to where we're at now. So I think people, because of the amount of media that we have access to, every one of us can be a reporter. Every one of us can get our word out to the public. And there's good and bad with that. But because of that, you know, these incidences, which is good, are now easily identified and put out for the public to be aware of. But it also breeds that perception that these types of things are happening on a daily basis, when in fact they're not. If you look at the number of police contacts at an average, occur in the United States, and how many of those end peacefully, and with subjects who are battling addiction, mental health issues, you have a variety of different things, they end peacefully because of the profession that law enforcement has grown into and the training that we provide our officers. However, I think there are large problems in certain police departments, and that's where the focus needs to be, is where these problems really take place. And they are identifiable, but it needs to not just be a police department issue. It needs to be an issue with the mayors, elected officials, police chiefs. It's not fair to single an individual officer. I don't want to say that. When an officer, no matter what, breaks the law, like the case of Mr. Floyd, needs to be held accountable to the highest degree. But that you can't just stop. It's not fair for these elected officials to throw that officer in the bus and feed him to the wolves. It needs to take ownership being taken by these elected officials to say that yes, there were warning signs that weren't acted on. The police chief didn't act on it. The board governing the police department didn't act on it, and the mayor didn't act on it. It's not fair to stick your head in the sand, ignoring these problems, and allowing the police department and the profession of law enforcement in general to be the left facing all the feedback from it, all the negative feedback. I fear that because of some of the cities that we have that are so financially strapped, you know, I speak to officers. I'm even though I'm a police chief, I have a lot of connections with a lot of rank and file officers throughout the region, even the country. And there's many departments that they don't train. They to meet the state requirement, they watch a video on YouTube, and that's just not enough. You know, there's some departments that they don't provide the training that we provide our officers, or they just watch a video, and there's no method to make sure that the officers are retaining this information, because it's all about dollars and cents. It's all about keeping that budget low because there's not enough money. But if you're going to do this, law enforcement, if you're going to manage police officers, you've got to find a way to do it properly, because if you don't, then incidents like this happen.
So maybe I can see how you already answered my last question somehow, but can you give me the final thought about what can be done to improve the situation overall? Because I hear that some communities have more problems than others, so it's not fair to generalize about the U.S. police culture, because we've done so many important steps forward to change the situation. So what can be done to improve the situation? Do you have suggestions? And maybe you mentioned the implicit bias training for officers? Are there other interventions that you think should take place to change the problems that these communities are experiencing?
No, again, holding people accountable, and again, that's the police officer, that's the police chief, that's the elected officials. Those are the people that need to be held accountable to ensure that, you know, police officers are expected to be everything from a referee, marriage counselor, psychologist, addiction specialist, and in some of these cities, they're paid near minimum wage, giving equipment that is faulty at best, putting them to resolve generational issues, and expecting them to succeed. And it's frankly ridiculous, and it's setting us all up for failure. You know, I think we're in a culture now that it's just so divisive that we're just a powder keg. And as you're seeing now with the riots across the country and even in the region where we haven't had necessarily these type of issues, it's, you know, to such a large degree, and such a national incident such as the case of Mr. Floyd, that we're all now being painted with the same broad brush. And I just hope that, you know, we can get things simmered down soon, that we can have the conversations that we were having with our communities, to learn more about each other, learn how we can work better together, and begin to move forward with the, you know, bringing peace back to our streets and our communities and building them and not tearing them down.
It seems that maybe this is the best time for us to explain what are the needs for both sides, right? What are the needs of the community at large? What are the needs of police departments, right?
Yeah.
This is an important time in our history. That was my last question, and I am so pleased with your participation. I want to thank you on behalf of everybody in IU Northwest. For those listening to us, if there are questions, you can contact me directly at msolinas@iu.edu. And you can also follow us on Instagram, #SPIU Northwest.